welcome to the Stop Shitting All Over Yourself podcast. We are on episode 92. Already we're episode 92. We are heading towards the end of the 100 episode series, which is very, very exciting. And today I'm actually super excited to have Karen Marinella-Hall on the podcast. Now, some of you may remember Karen from her days on WE56. Others will remember her from just the other day in the South Shore Conference for Women. She was our MC and she was fabulous. We had so much fun with her. Or you may be seeing her around these days because her media presence now is growing again. And she is an executive coach and an all-around amazing, incredible woman. And when we talked a lot about in this podcast about mastering your inner narrative and how that impacts how you show up in the world. For she and I, we both went to Emerson. We both had long, varied careers doing many different things. So many stories that were told. And we've talked about this before, stories that were told to us about who we are. And then the stories that we tell ourselves long after some of the people who wrote the stories are gone. And we bring those with us over the course of our lifetime. And then here we are at some stage of our lives, basically with this whole narrative about who we are that we haven't really revisited in a long time. And a lot of the stories that we tell about ourselves are just really mean, really unhealthy, and they keep us from truly claiming some things that are vital for our existence. Something as simple as rest, right? Rest, taking time off, clocking out from work. Unless your inner narrative allows you to believe that you can still have value when you're not working and not producing in a capitalist society that's very, very difficult, like I find myself back on that train, then you'll always find reasons to work because the inner narrative doesn't actually allow you to do it without guilt. So you might actually not work, but you'll be thinking about it constantly while you're doing the dishes and whatnot, right? So before we can take action on a lot of things to really that we feel like we deserve or that we're ready for or that we know we want to do, but something keeps holding us back. We're like, I don't understand why I can't just clock out, or I don't understand why I can't just do whatever, right? A lot of times that comes from an inner narrative that has created a foundation that that tells a story that if we do that thing, like either we're not capable, we can't do it, you think you're all that, like whatever the story is, that's the thing that actually holds us back, right? So like once you solve that story, the actual action of doing the thing is not that hard to do, but it's the journey to get to that point where you're mastering your inner narrative to even give yourself permission to do the thing. And so in this conversation with Karen, we talked about that really in depth, and it's why I wanted to share this with you is because all of the Stop Shitting All Over Yourselves episodes, every single one of them talks about something that you may or may not want to address at, like, you're like, this is what I want to look at right now. I'm having trouble with pleasure, or I'm having trouble with quitting, or I'm having whatever it is that you're having trouble with, you realize this is what I want to work on. And you read the books and you know the things to do, but you can't seem to take the action, and you're like, I don't understand what's holding me back. This is a possibility, right? So this is a really, really real possibility of something that could be holding you back, that with some work on rewriting the inner narrative, that then this thing that was so difficult to do before, now you're just like, oh, this is easy, I can do this. But it was really about the story as opposed to trying to force ourselves to do the thing. And so I'm really excited to see how, after listening to this podcast, things start to flow better for you, kind of like lube it up a little bit. And you're like, oh yeah, this is working. This is working now. So I'm not going to keep you from it. Let's listen. I was doing it and I could tell that like some of the questions, like I would have answered them differently like a few years ago, you know, like as you do them, you're like, cause you can see, and I'm like, damn, I remember when I was so quick to get angry or when I was so worked up, and I was like, damn, we've come a long way, baby.
Isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth? For me it was a game changer when I did that assessment. I think I did it 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago for the first time. And it was kind of a thing in the coaching community. People were kind of talking about it. So and often I did it, and all of a sudden my life made sense. Like, oh, oh, you're a stickler and an avoider. And yeah, it could not have been truer. It could not have been truer.
So I'm curious though, you know, when you find, so like I tend to, when somebody says something or I see something that's true, at least, you know, for many years it would be for everything. Now I've learned how to like temper this, but my first response is, you're absolutely wrong. Fuck off. You don't know anything about me. Right. But like now I'm a little bit better about it, but my instinctive reaction is still, no, I'm not like that. Do you find
Well,
yourself doing
well,
that?
Yes, sometimes, yes, but I'm a harsh critic, so hence the stickler label that
Right?
came out. There you go. I'm a harsh self-critic. So as soon as stickler popped up, I'm like, yes, I am a stickler. So, other times, like if people tell me, oh, you're too opinionated, you're too this, you're too that, I would definitely put my hand up and say, oh, no, I don't think so. But when stickler kind of came up and avoider, oh my
Oh
gosh,
my God, I'm
that is
such an avoider. That's definitely one of my things.
oh, me.
Ugh.
Oh my gosh. And it holds us back.
It really does, and it's funny because you start to realize that you've been in your way all along. And it's like your brain, how good is our brain at like writing the story that will prevent you from doing whatever it is?
Everything that is. So I'm famous for my little to-do list. I walk around with a little to-do list. I have one right in front of me now. I am not even remotely exaggerating when I tell you, and I do it every week. So here's what look at this. This is not bad for
Oh,
listening
it
to.
should. You're speaking to my heart right now.
It's just a few little things on here right now. Usually it's a page and a half, but I carry over things from week to week. I am not kidding you. When I took that assessment, I had two things on this list that I would carry over week to week for not one and not two, but almost 3 years
Oh, I
of
was gonna
things.
say, like I have some that go back years that you just keep moving them, and at some point though, I look at it, I'm like, you know what? If I haven't done this yet, I'm probably not gonna do it. I'm gonna do myself a huge favor. I'm just taking it off the list.
And that's smart. That I wasn't smart. I wasn't
Oh
smart
no,
enough
I
to
did
do
that
it.
after like 3 years. It took me a long time to figure that out.
I finally took one off the list. No lie, last month in the month of April, I took it off the list. I finally did it after all these years, which was just sort of it was a self-care kind of thing, financial self-care. Like going through, and I hate this stuff. That's the problem. I hate the
Yeah,
finances. I hate the accounting part of our
me
business,
too.
running us. I hate it. So I avoid it, avoid it, avoid it. I finally did it, and it was like I would rather go to the dentist, and I hate the dentist.
Oh my God,
But
I feel like you're like I'll cry. I'm sitting there doing my finances, and I'm like, I just thank you. This is so hard, and I just did it before this meeting.
I hate it. May 1st, right?
Yeah, I did it. You know why though? I was excited to meet with you, right? And so I was like, all right, I'm gonna kind of like ride this momentum wave and be like, all right, I'm gonna do something I really hate. So I just
Me
want to
too.
say, I feel like a really big person right now. I feel like I'm like better than everyone else, right? When you do that
And
thing, you're like,
that's
look
the
at me.
thing. That's the thing. When you finally like overcome that
Hmm.
avoider thing, when you kind of attack it head on or whatever it is that comes up for you in that assessment, when you finally attack it, you feel so good on the other side of it. Like, oh my gosh, I finally, and it wasn't as hard as I thought it was. It just was monotonous and something I don't enjoy doing. But sometimes we have to do things we don't enjoy.
Actually, I'm curious because there's something my wife and I were talking about this the other day, and this is kind of dovetails into your specialty of coaching too. Over the years, you meet people and you talk to people where we have conversations like this, and we talk about that moment of like incredible friction within us, where we're just like, right, and then either you push through it and do the thing. But there are many people, and I'm curious, because this has always been very difficult for me as a coach, is that there are people in this world who, when they reach that point, will actively sabotage themselves. Speaking of the saboteurs, and so I'm curious to know, like, how, in your experience, how can one tell, right, when they're in that moment, like if if like, what are the signs that they might be sabotaging themselves?
So I don't know about you, but I have a bodily reaction when the saboteur piece comes in. So for me, it's in the gut. I feel like I've just had 6 sour lemons. That's the feeling I get in my gut. Ugh. You know, some people, their heart starts to race. Some people break out in a sweat. I find there's usually some sort of an anxiety related reaction to it
Mm-hmm.
that comes up. And that's the trigger, I think, for a lot of people. But then to your point, there are some people who are just not even aware. There's zero self-awareness. I was talking to a client this week, as a matter of fact, who described some characteristics of a parent that weren't ideal.
Mm-hmm.
And as the conversation went on, this person has the exact same characteristics. And I had to call it. There was zero self awareness. So it's hard if people don't know and you don't have a physical reaction. But most people have something. Do you get one? Like some
I
sort of
do.
a
Mine in my hackles. So like, right, it's in the lower back. It's like I feel it, sort of like my hackles go up.
mm,
I think though, it's interesting that you say that because I think that like so my decolonization coach and I have been talking about the mind body responses to things. So it's interesting that you're bringing this up like right now.
mm,
And when I think back to myself, say maybe 10 years ago, not even that far back actually, let's go back 7 or 8 years, I was in such a traumatic state that I wasn't even in my body. And so I wouldn't even have known if there was so much
mm.
other stuff going on. So I'm curious, like, do you feel like in order for someone to make that determination, that there's like, you have to be, like you said, there's no self awareness, but sometimes, like, do you feel like that sometimes that's like a protective mechanism? There's another step
It
in
can be.
between.
It can be. There's definitely, I call it like that peeling the onion a little bit. You got to kind of
Yes.
keep peeling and kind of figure out what's at the root of the whole thing. I mean, hence the 3-year financial piece of work I had to do. It took 3 years to figure out what's holding me back. So I think you do have to peel that onion with yourself and with people that you're coaching as well to help them see it. So it's one thing for me to see it, but the coach, the person needs to see it. The client needs to
Right.
see
You
it,
can't,
and
you
you need to
can't.
get them there.
Yeah. And that's actually, so I think that's really like, do you enjoy that journey of like, cause like you can see it, right? Cause like, it's almost like the Matrix. You're like, oh, I see it. Right. But then
Yep.
it's almost like a puzzle. So tell me a little bit about like that part of it for you.
Well, you know too.
I know, but I
This is
want
just
people to hear about it from you.
it's really about asking questions. I love it. It's a whole I think it's an exciting piece because you really start to, I love that peeling the onion idea
Yeah.
of really trying to get to the root of it. I see it, but it takes a while to help them see it as well for themselves. And so kind of guiding that conversation. And it's like a little treasure hunt almost, a little bit of a journey where you're kind of discovering this about this person. As you go along, you find out more and more and more. But it's all in asking great questions or asking basic questions. They don't even have to be crazy insightful. One of my favorite questions that always gets sort of a blank stare is the what do you want question.
Right.
What do you want? And it's amazing to me how many people cannot answer that question. What do you want?
Do you think we're like allowed to, a lot of us aren't allowed to sort of like, or, we're allowed to, but we don't think we are, right? Because it's like, I'm supposed to be, especially if you're socialized as a woman, what am I doing for other people? Like, it's almost for you to think about wanting for yourself is like, you're so, what is it like, what a terrible mom you are. Like, you're so greedy or you're so selfish,
Oh, totally,
right? Those
totally.
stories. Like, how do you, like, so, because
Totally.
I'm curious, like, at some point, actually, let me ask you this. At some point, you must have like been on the other side of this, right? So like
Totally.
what was your moment where you were like, wait a minute, like I can do this, or maybe this is a direction I want to go in.
Oh my God, best story ever. Um, I was in Antarctica.
Wow, that's
Okay.
already a really good story. It just starts right there. I was in Antarctica. Okay, hit me with this.
It starts right there. So doing corporate work, do a lot of corporate work at that point. And my boys, I'd done a ton of travel. So 2 of my 3 boys said to me, Mom, you've got to go to the seventh continent. Why? I don't know why, because I've been to all the other ones. So you've got to finish this. This is a bucket list thing. So it was a stressful thing in the corporate world, dealing with all the pressures of, you know that deal, the corporate world. So I'm on this trip with these two to Antarctica because, of course, they all wanted to go with me.
That's why they wanted you to go.
I think there's truth in that. So we're on this trip, and it's daylight at that time of year. It was summer when we were down there, so it was 30 degrees. This was 4 or 5 years ago now. It was 5 years ago, and it was New Year's Eve, and I was outside at midnight enjoying this scene. I have a photo of it here in my office. The light is just extraordinary because it never got dark. It got sort of, fairy tale like golden out there.
Wow.
And it's all these icebergs around you and mountains and absolute serenity and absolute quiet and just pure. And I literally felt like I was in the presence of something sacred. And I'm not, one of these people, that professes to have a tremendous faith or anything like that. But in that moment, I felt something very different and profound that made me say, I need to make a change. I need to make a change. It just opened up something in me. So it was in Antarctica.
That's amazing. Were
Yeah,
you
it
scared
was.
when you realized you had to make a change, or were you like resolute, like there? Because like there's, I'm afraid, but then there's like, you know what? I've got like I'm ready. It's time.
It was so clear, and I can be a little bit wishy-washy and afraid of my own shadow and afraid of that question, what do I want? I definitely can be afraid of that. And in that moment, it was just so clear. And then the universe works in very mysterious ways. I came back from that trip, and that was in January. 2 weeks later, I was laid off from my job. And then 2 weeks after that, both my parents became ill. So all of a sudden, the whole universe changed. And I was available to my parents during a really hard time. And I started to build this life that I truly wanted. And it was incredible. It was just an absolute life-changing time.
I think that was when I think about there was a moment in April 2018 where I had no idea what I wanted. I remember like sitting on the floor of my house and I was just like crying and bawling and I was like, you know what? I don't even know how to know what I want. Like I didn't even know how to ask the question because I just felt like a lot of things. But then when I look back now, I see that as like the best moment of my life, even though like it was so traumatic because that was the beginning. Because like at that point when you say like, I don't know, but I know that it's not this. And that's one thing I know it's not. And then I can do that thing. And but damn, that's hard. That is like hard. Like you just mentioned your parents were sick. You like, that is a brutal unbecoming right there where you're starting out.
And what's so odd about it, I mean, when my position was eliminated at this tech company, I was bummed. I thought I'm going to retire from this place, live, on easy street and be just, easy. So I was bummed when I left. And I have to tell you that in hindsight, it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened because when your older parents are ill, it's hard to just take time off from work and go take them to all these doctor's offices and do all that with them. And I ended up losing my dad at that point. My mom is doing well. Thank you
Oh,
very
good.
much.
So glad to hear it.
She's alive and well in the Cape. And but my dad did not fare well during that period. But I got to tell you, I was so present. And I don't think I would have been had I not done Antarctica and got some presents at that moment, hadn't been laid off, and then was able to be fully present for that whole period. What a gift.
Absolutely. And I think for my same thing happened with so my mom got very ill and it was a brief period of my life where I was a millionaire and I was able to just quit my job and be present with her the whole time. And it is a gift because, you look back on that and I think it gives you it's almost like what COVID did years later, where it really makes you think about what is important, what you want to spend your time on, like what you want your life to, sorry, I don't know if you can hear it, but there's a Coast Guard chopper going like right outside my house right now. So,
No,
I mean, it's fine. I live right on the cliff on Plymouth. So it's constantly going it is
I grew up in
nice.
Plymouth. I don't know if we ever talked about that.
Oh, you're in Plymouth?
I grew up there.
No kidding. Whereabouts?
I grew up in North Plymouth.
Oh, wow. We go up there a lot for dinner. We are in South Plymouth in Manomet.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It was my
So
dream to move here.
My grandfather lived down in Manomet on the cliff, and he was on Shore Road.
I'm actually in the same association that your grandfather. I live on Seaview Drive.
I know just where that is.
Yeah, I know this is what happens on the South Shore. You realize that everybody's your neighbor or somebody from somewhere. Well, okay, I'm going to hit you with something. Oh, go ahead. You first, and then I'll tell you what I learned about you.
What you don't know about what no one knows about me, I'm about to share this with you.
Oh, wow.
I was the queen. So if you go down to the bottom, I think if you have the same thing, there's a little ramp that goes down to a beach down there, a rocky beach.
Yep.
Queen of the rock climbing down there.
You know what? I've tried to climb those rocks. That is no joke. That is, I just want to
They're
say that is
they're hard.
mad skills right there. Anyone who has seen my TikTok,
Yeah.
you've seen those rocks.
Yep.
Wow. That's
Oh yeah.
amazing.
I was the queen of this. People, there's one rock in particular. I could
Uh,
climb that blindfolded.
That's amazing. Oh my God, I love that. And so I was looking, because I have a whole thing of, because things that I want to talk about with you. Typically the conversation kind of just goes where it goes, but I
It
have the
goes.
questions in
It's
case.
fine.
But as I was doing that, I also learned that you and I both went to Emerson. And
I know.
I
You went many years after I did, I'm afraid.
I'm trying to figure out, I went in 98, 97, 98. You were
Yeah, that's
actually
how
a
I
news
know I
anchor by
went.
then. You were on
I,
10?
oh yeah. I was on Channel 56. Channel
56.
50.
Hey, listen, I was
Yes.
at Emerson watching you on my little TV, and it had a little VCR thing in it.
That's hysterical. That's the only school I applied to.
Me too. Like, and my
That's
sister.
why.
I love that school. Oh my God, I loved Emerson so much. It was so great.
It
Um,
was.
it was good times. Now I'm curious, did you live in the dorms?
Oh no. Oh no. So I grew up in a very strict Italian home. I had to commute every day. I had to
Oh,
commute back and forth every
wow.
day.
So
So I was
growing
on the
up in
classes
Pakistan, I
route.
had nowhere else to go. I had to kind of live in the dorms.
There you go. I wish I could have, but
They
I
had
wasn't
some really
allowed
nice
to.
dorms. Oh, you know what's funny? So I moved to the States. So this is my first, I moved to the States once before many years ago. That didn't work out well for me. This time around, I moved to Boston. I'm in 6 Arlington Street, right on the common, right on the park. Gorgeous. And I think to myself, what am I, 21 or something? And I'm like, I'm going to rent an apartment around here when I graduate. That's what I said.
I
I said,
still say that.
no, they turned those into luxury condos that are like $10
I
million dollars a
know.
piece now. I'm like, oh my
I can
God.
afford those. I used to have the same dream, and I still have the same dream. You
Oh,
can't
God,
afford
it's
it.
so lovely. Who can afford it? But it's so, every time I see a Marlborough Street address or like, I'm like, wow, that's a nice house right there.
It's a good house. It was a great school. I loved it.
Oh, it was so much fun. It was absolutely fabulous. So I'm curious. So like when we go, one of the things when we talk about, cause you work with, well, actually I'd like to talk a little about who you work with. So my listeners and people who follow me on LinkedIn tend to be, overachieving people who are in corporate America, healthcare, academia,
Yep.
who are also at this point, like you and I've talked about this a lot, how the corporate infrastructure exists in one way, and we're trying to navigate a new way of working in there
Yeah.
while doing a lot of this work. So I'm curious to know, like in your work, what are some of the things that you run into, or what would you say is like the thing that you run into most often related to this this friction that now exists between the lives that people want to have versus what quote corporations feel like they need to mandate to be able to
It's so true. It was almost a really sad conversation I had a couple weeks ago with a youngish um, client. And he was reaching out. It was his first call with me. I always start with, what do you want out of coaching? And he literally went like this. He's like, look around. Look where I'm talking to you from. And he was in a little apartment at his kitchen counter, and you could see the stove and the refrigerator and all this behind him. And he said to me, I moved to New York City to work at a big financial services firm, and I'm talking to you today from New York City in my apartment at my kitchen counter, and I am so lonely and so miserable. I have my dream job, and I'm here. And he's really feeling isolated, and I'm hearing that. So in that age group, that's what I'm hearing, where people are feeling a little bit isolated. They don't want to be in the office all the time, but they also don't want to be sitting at their kitchen counter all the time. And then how do you bridge that gap? And he said, I came to New York, like capital of, the
I
financial
know.
world. And he said, and I thought I was going to, build all these relationships and have this great network and all this. And he said, and I'm sitting here in my kitchen, and I have no network. I don't know what to do. really hard conversations, because I think that's a big piece of this. How are you building that network? And can it be done the same way? No. The world has changed.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you build that network in a different way moving forward? And I think those are really big questions, especially for that generation.
You know, and you said something, if you I want to connect what you said earlier to what you said just now, you talked about what do you want? And I'm going to take this person's scenario and just kind of create my own fantasy scenario out of it. But like, a long time ago, I thought wanted a lot of money, right? Because it was, having a lot of money does give you a lot of freedom and all of those things, right? And so I'm not going to discount that. But there was this list of prescribed boxes that if you checked it off, you would be happy. Like that was the rule. That's success. Or, it's not even happy. You'd be successful. You would have won at life, whatever that means. And what I'm finding is that, and maybe this is why they called it a midlife crisis in the 80s and the 90s, but what it really was people realizing and they checked off all the boxes, but they were still miserable. And now they realized, I don't even know how to figure out what I want. So like, is that sort of why it's so important to know what you want in the first place?
I think it is. And to know, and I think even before you get to that, you have to know who you are. So, right?
Absolutely. Oh my God. I didn't know who I was. I had to figure that out first.
Right. You've got to figure that out first. And really think about how you're showing up in the world and how you want to show up in the world. Not how you want people to see you in the world. How do you want to show up in the world? What is the person you want to be in this world? And what are your values? I really think values are so important too, to understand what's important to you won't be important to the next person. But if you're working at a place where your values don't align with the company values, that's a big problem. And
it is bad.
Miserable. You are miserable. I mean, I've seen people like this too who they're on antidepressants, they're gaining weight, the dog barks at them when they come home, the wife's cranky or the husband, and they're miserable because they're working at a place that doesn't reflect who they are. Now, is there privilege around that? And we have the option to have you bet. Yeah. There is some of that for sure. But I think that you always have to be able to step back and be real with yourself first, regardless of circumstances. Some people have more privilege than others. I totally understand that. But it starts right here. Who are you? And what do you want to be in the world? And I think you can do a lot from that place.
Absolutely. But you know what's interesting? You said something about like privilege, and it's something that, we both talk about a lot in terms of like, we have had a lot of privileges to be able to achieve the way we have. And so you throw the ladder down, you do what you can.
Yes.
One of the ways in which we do that, you and I both, and I love how you've just allowed me to bring this right in here, is the South Shore Conference for Women, because we met there and it's like, it's affordable, it's accessible. And one of the things that I really, and because I saw you on stage there and I was like, oh my God, I don't know who this person is, but I love her. And then I was like, oh my God, wait a minute, I totally know you. I was like, why do I know you? And then I was like, oh my God, of course. But because once you are able to access sort of like the conversations, even if you're not, and I was talking to somebody about this the other day who, she's been doing the work slowly on her own through podcasts and whatnot. And she reached this stage where she was like, I'm ready to go to the next level. And like, she had the confidence to apply for something that she would never have applied for, say like a year ago. And now her income situation has changed and so on. But if you had told her a year ago that she would now be in a position where, where she would have the means to be able to self-actualize in the way she wants to, she wouldn't have believed you. But for like a year, just sitting there, reading the books, listening to the podcast, things slowly percolate through. Yes. And like, I think there's an element of trusting that the network that you have, the relationships you build, the tools that you can use, your subconscious will do a lot of that work with you.
I agree. And there's a courage factor in there, isn't there, also? Where you have to have that courage to step out and be a little uncomfortable. And that's not easy. And that's something, I mean, I struggle with that too. I mean, it sounds crazy. I mean, I was on TV for 1,000 years here in Boston, and people are like, what do you mean you struggle with, having that confidence to do that? what's interesting about the work I did before, you weren't allowed to have an opinion back then in news.
I
So
actually had a question about that.
you didn't have an opinion. So for years, I was trained at Emerson to not have an opinion, to be objective. And so who the heck am I now, she says, to come out and have an opinion or a thought on anything? This was not how I was trained. So this courage that has to come into what you're suggesting too, that allowing things to percolate, allowing yourself to trust yourself, know yourself, trust yourself, and then go out there. Ooh, that last step is like that step on the diving
That's
board.
the hard. It's like, oh my God,
Holy cow, that's a hard one.
I'm just going to stand
Yeah.
here for 6 years, just poised over the
Yeah.
edge.
Or when you're going into the ocean down near you, there, it is cold.
Oh yeah,
You
no,
start with
that's
a toe. Takes a long time to get up to the knees in that water.
I'm not getting to the knee. I'm just going to stand there and be like, this is really nice. I'm going to look at it.
I totally get that. I
Um,
totally get it.
you actually, so you going back to what you were saying about, being on the news, and I think this is really interesting because you said earlier about not how you want to be seen, right? You got to figure out how you want to show up, not how you want to
Yes.
be seen.
Yes.
And what's interesting is that from our most of us are silently programming and conditioning ourselves to show up and masking in such a way so that we are showing up the way we want to be seen, not how we are. What's really interesting to me is that you are actually actively trained into forget about even if you know who you are, it doesn't matter. Like, and so I'm curious how difficult, like, I'm curious to know what that was like for you to cross over into this space where you were like, I'm now going to share my opinion. Like, tell me a little bit more about that part because that's
Oh, I
delicious.
still struggle with that.
I
I
know that's why I
still
love it. It's
struggle with
delicious.
that.
Help me, Obi-Wan.
That doesn't come very easily. But I think being in so when I had to leave television, the station was sold to Channel 7, which was a great move for Channel 7 to acquire them. But we were all out of jobs. So all of a sudden, you have to start to think about, okay, now what am I going to do with myself? And all this experience that I've had here was a remarkable, remarkable experience being there. And that was the first moment of what am I even capable of? Never mind how do I want to show up. What can I even do? When you've done something for a long time and that's all you know how to do, what do you do now?
Yeah.
And there was a whole process of reinvention that was one of the hardest things I think I've ever done because I didn't even know what I could do. I went to Emerson. I was going to do this. I went, worked in radio and television and ended up here. I mean, I'd done it for 25 years. Now what? I didn't even know where to begin with that. So that was the beginning of that metamorphosis. And I thrived initially in that corporate world. I loved it. And in hindsight, I almost wish I'd gone into business. I would have been a CEO or something. I
Oh my God,
loved it.
absolutely.
I
Absolutely. You
loved
could
it.
still
I
be a
loved it.
CEO. Like we can do we can do anything.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, I don't mean
You
it
can
like
do
that. I
anything.
actually mean we literally can just do anything. We're like, hey, I'm going to do this now, and then I'm going to do this now, and then I'm going to do this now, right? You've already
And
done like
you've done
five
that.
things. You could easily
Yeah,
do something else.
you've done that. You've reinvented yourself a bunch for
It's
sure.
true. It's true. You know what it really is, though? It's the peeling of the onions layer, as you say. Like, what's really been happening is I've just been slowly peeling away. And, like, I love the analogy because it's like you cry the whole way through. You're
It's
just
so it's so true. It's so true. But you've done it masterfully. I mean, you've
oh
just
my God, is that what it looks like on the outside?
It's all good. It's all good. I think you do a great job.
Well,
And I
it's
love
not.
what you, yeah.
No, no, please.
I love what you're doing now with this podcast, like inviting people to explore a different way of looking at everything. It's amazing. We have to. I think we get not pigeonholed, but we get into a place where this is how it's supposed to be. At least that's the stickler in me saying
Me too.
this is what we do and this is how we do it. And I love the invitation to kind of step out of that and reimagine and reinvent. It's good.
I love the ability to be able to do that because I think the story that we were told as kids was, and I think that's part of the challenge, right? Especially if you
Absolutely.
grew up in the 80s and the 90s where this is what you do is what you do for the rest of your life and then you retire.
That's it.
And so then
Yeah.
you went into corporate and you're like, okay, I'm going to do this till the rest of my life and retire. When I was in Pakistan, actually, I wanted to move to the States desperately and I was going to work at McDonald's till I retired. And then I was going to be, so then after that, when I moved to the States, I worked at the Paradise as a bouncer, and I loved that so much.
Oh, did
I was like, I'm
you
going to do
really?
this for the rest of my life.
Oh my gosh,
You cannot do
that's
that
a
job for
job.
more than a year or two.
That's
It's
a,
hard.
I would think so. That's stressful. Good for
It was,
you though, in
it was
paradise.
fun. Oh my God, it was so
Oh,
much fun.
good thing you're
Um,
younger than I am. You weren't bouncing me out of there at that point.
Actually, you know what's really interesting? So our best shows were this band called Super Diamond, where many of like at the, and I actually it was like it was usually people who were older than me, women who would come and listen to Super Diamond, and so that was our biggest thing. That and Walk the Line, the Aerosmith cover band from they're so good. Oh my God, they're amazing. So we actually had, and because I typically tend to go a generation above in my media because growing up in Pakistan, like all of my stuff is like the 70s and 80s. I barely know stuff from like the 90s. And my friends who are all in their 50s and 60s are like, why is it that your pop culture reference is like Eddie Money? And
I
it's
love
like,
that.
because
I
he's
love that
amazing.
about you. Good playlists. Good
I
playlists.
know, right? Um, So let's talk a little bit about I want to talk about the assessment. So specifically because you had me take it and it's part of the modality sort of that you work with. So
Yeah.
I would love to because as people listen to the podcast they're going to be like, "Hey, I want to learn. I want what is this tool and how does it work?" So tell me a little bit about what it does and how to use it.
So this is great. By the way, I want to find out what your top two, if you want to share.
Oh,
What were your top
absolutely. I
two?
have my
What
thing and
were
everything.
what were your top two?
Okay, so my top two saboteurs were, give me a second, let me just get it open. Were
Curious.
hyper vigilant, which was no surprise to me. Hyper
No
vigilant.
surprise.
And then I'm a combination of restless and controller.
Oh,
So
interesting.
those were the two. The restless one made a lot of sense. I tend to get bored really quickly, hence the
Yeah.
reinvention. And then the controller, I think that comes from my hyper vigilance. Both of those come from my trauma, where it's like, so that's something I'm actively working on, like
Good
deconstructing
for
right
you.
now.
Good for you.
It's because the hackles, like I'd like it if they weren't always like, like ready to go.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know what? But then there are also some plus sides to that as well. So you definitely are focused and know how to get things done, and so there's some nice things that come with that too. It's not all bad. It's not all bad. All right. So again, this was introduced to me a couple 3 years ago, and this is based on the work of a gentleman called Shirzad Chamine, who's based out in California. And he used to be the CEO of the Coaches Training Institute, CTI, which is
Hmm.
where I got my coaching training. And so I kind of went into this thing thinking, this might be a little bit woo-woo, I'm not really sure. But it helps you, this assessment helps you identify the saboteurs. So what are these saboteurs? It sounds a little woo-woo. These are the voices inside of you. We all have them. We all have pieces of ourselves that talk to us and give us negative feedback. Every single person does. And whether it's the judge, whether it's, the stickler, the avoider, whatever it is. And these are lies that we're telling ourselves on a consistent basis. And for me, what was so revealing by taking this assessment and sort of seeing where I landed with these two particularly, it was really interesting to be able to be aware of it, understand the impact it has and how it was holding me
Hmm.
back from different things, and then learning how to manage it. It's not going away. In fact, it's almost like a party. When something's challenging come up, you kind of wait. Okay, stickler, where the
Oh
heck
my
are
God,
you? It's time.
absolutely.
Come on in. Come on. Or the avoider, whatever it is. Knowing what it is when it happens, and then how can you manage it moving forward. That's the beautiful thing of this that I really have cherished going through. I really have loved it. And then when I hear it in other people too, how do you manage it? It's there, it's showing up. What do you do with it?
What you said actually, I think it actually creates a little bit of tension, I think, in a worldview where you feel like once you figure out what the solution is, you're just not supposed to feel it anymore, right? So like,
No.
and I think this is a very interesting way of approaching it because I think so many of us are given the messages that you have to fix whatever it is. Even I
Oh,
defaulted to it when we were just talking. I said, "Oh, I got to fix this," and you were like, "No, no, no," because like that's how we're conditioned
Yep.
to think that this is something wrong. I love how you said that it's really about knowing what it is, recognizing it, having that awareness, and then managing it. And now you said you've been using the tool for a couple of years, like in terms of the management stuff. How have you found that it's sort of like made your life a little bit easier?
Oh my gosh. Just knowing the avoider piece, first of all, every time I hit the taxes, anytime, anything to do with the checking account, anything, avoider shows up. And I know that that's what's happening, but I still have to get it done. So I've created little routines, little tactics, little
Mm-hmm.
things that just help me get through it. And I feel so good on the other side of it. I also have been empowered in so many ways. Things that I thought were too hard or that I couldn't do, like this podcast. I've been avoiding the podcast world because I thought it would be hard because I didn't know, what would I have to say on this podcast or something like this. I've been avoiding it. So now I'm kind of stepping in, forcing myself to explore. And I love that I'm doing that. It's so much fun. So I was on the golf course this week too. Same idea. And I'm a terrible golfer. Just throw it out there. But we go to this golf course, my husband and I, and this weekend, as a matter of fact, we got to the 18th hole, and the 18th hole, you tee off, and it goes over a street to the fairway on the other side of a street. And I've never, ever, ever in a million years teed off from that hole, because why bother? I'm only going to hit a car. So this weekend was the first time I said, I'm going to do it. So I'm confronting things that I know I've been avoiding just because I know I can. Just
Mm-hmm.
confront them. That's the muscle I try to build. I'm afraid of this. I'm avoiding it. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens when you go on a podcast. Let's see what happens. And by the way, I hit it over the street.
Oh, I was going to say, how did that go? And also, you came on this podcast and didn't die. So I feel like you're
I
winning.
didn't
This is just
die.
a win for you all around.
Good week. This is a good week.
This is a really, really good week. Um, so I realized, actually, speaking of which, you're like, what would I have to say? It's like, well, we've already filled up 40 minutes and and I still haven't even
I
gotten to
know.
well, I mean, I did get through the questions, but they just sort of happen automatically, but I have like another list. In terms of, okay, so now we've talked about the tool and how to use it. So I'll have the link in the show notes so people can test it
Oh,
out
good,
and
good.
look at it. So the question that I have now is like, okay, so if someone is listening to this podcast, because typically what I hope people would get out of a podcast is they hear somebody and something like it scratches an itch somewhere. Maybe it's not today, maybe it's not
Yeah.
tomorrow, but it happens eventually. And then they're like, I want to explore this a little bit further. I'd love to know, like, how do you work with people? What do you help them do? How do you help, what is it that, because you mentioned what they want, but tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So if they're dealing just with this and they're just interested in the positive intelligence, that's one route for sure. And take that assessment. It's free. It's easy to do. What did it take you,
It
five,
took
ten
like
minutes
5 minutes,
maybe?
and it's real, and it's great. I love the way the results come out, and like you said, it's really about how do you live with this rather than how do you quote unquote fix yourself.
That's right. And then oftentimes I'll work with someone after the fact teaching how to build those muscles. So there are lots of exercises you can do to build different muscles depending on what your results are and things like that. So that's always good. But my typical clients, I definitely work with a lot of high potential corporate. I'm working in corporate. And I introduced this to a lot of my clients in corporate, which is so interesting because I thought at first it would be too woo-woo for them to be thinking about their saboteurs. But it shows up. It shows up a lot with them. So I work with clients for a minimum of 6 months usually, and we work through the things that are holding them back. That's my sweet spot, and helping them get ready to get to that next level. So next level leadership is my sweet spot with them. And it's a magnificent career. I mean,
Oh,
when you help people every day and really help them get somewhere, that's the best job I ever had in my life.
oh my God, I love it. It's so much. It's one of my favorite things to do. So much so that
Yep.
I was like, hey, let's sit and talk because it's a fun thing to do to help create connections where like it may not have been before, just because we've seen so many different things at this point. You were hold on, I want to come back. You said something about, oh my God, it was so delicious about 6 months. I want to come back to the 6 months thing, and I really want to touch on that because you know there's a lot of coaches out there, and a lot of times like, oh, we'll do this for 3 days, or we'll do this, or we'll do that. It's like, or 3 hours, and that's all you get. And like, and people, I think that people who are nervous about investing in themselves are nervous about this idea of doing a commitment for that long, which to me, honestly, 6 months is short. Like I will work with, when I have a coach, because I typically am always working with at least one type of coach on something, right? Like,
Right,
so,
right.
so there's always something different. Right now it's decolonization, but it's for a full year, because it takes the first 3 months just for you to get to know each other enough to where it's like,
Yeah.
like you're able to, I mean, obviously you see benefits from the beginning, but if you really want life change, like you've got to, so like, I love that you said that you work with people for a minimum of 6 months, and like anyone listening, you're going to want to do 12, because the first six
It's so
months are you
true.
getting there. The next six are the ones that you're like,
Yes.
but you're really turning it into the engine of your life, right? So that you
You're
like,
so right.
oh, it's beautiful. It's so delicious. I just wanted to touch on that. Oh, so yummy.
You're right. So back to my onion, you peel the onion in the first 6 months and you
Yep.
kind of get them where they need to be. And then you're right, it's the engine of your life, 6 to 12 months. And so more often than not, I mean, I've got a huge rate of people that stay on for more than a year usually. So
That makes a
that's
lot of sense.
exciting. But that first 6 months is critical.
Because I think that's where we confront the most of our, I think the first time I went into coaching, it was the hardest, because that's where you're literally confronting those demons, those voices, the saboteurs, as it were, that are
Yeah.
basically, I mean, they're trying to protect you from a danger that doesn't actually exist, but they're still trying to protect you. That's,
You're right.
I love that. So, okay, before we wrap up, I just wanted to make sure, is there anything that you wanted to share that we did not get to? Anything that you were like, oh, we were talking about that and I wanted to come back to it?
No, nothing around that. Just thank you for this. I love this. I'm so happy for you and the success you're enjoying and the message you're getting out there. Honestly, this is so much fun and this was really great. I loved
Oh,
it.
thank you. It means a lot to me. Like that you say that, because this is one of those things where it's a labor of love, and you kind of just do it and you do it and you
I
do it
know
and you
it.
just hope that
I
and
know
so I,
it.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're just right, and you're an Emersonian,
I
so
know,
there you
right? And
go.
look at that, all of it together, and from Plymouth. It's like we're basically known each other all our lives.
I know. We
Thank you.
could be siblings in another world, or
You know what? I am very woo. I totally believe in that shit. So like,
me too. Me too.
thank you so much, everyone. The links to reach out to Karen will be on the show notes, and absolutely do take that assessment. I'm telling you, I saw it, and it's so fun. It really is. It's really fun. So thanks so much for coming on the show.
Oh my gosh, thanks for having me, and I hope to talk again soon.
Thanks. Take care.